Hi, everybody. This is Teris Dunn-Jaglowicz again. So for this month's webinar, I wanted to talk about virtual lab activities. As a science teacher, I feel like that's, one of those challenging things, but I feel like a lot of teachers have adapted well, especially since technology is such a major part of our lives today. So the first thing with me is why use a virtual lab? Many of us we look at it as, like I said, technology. It's a technology-based society now. Everything is driven by technology. Most people now and most children now are familiar with technology, and it's one of those we can learn something from somebody else based on technology. The good thing with virtual labs, they can be teacher-led or students can work independently. It's kind of how you decide you want to set it up. It works great. It's one of those, I've used virtual labs in person, so when we made the transition to remote, fortunately, it wasn't too much of a task for me. It was just a matter of communication. Lastly, another reason, a big reason for me, or a big positive for me, I feel, with virtual labs is you get the real world experiences and connections with the kids. Sometimes we have a difficult time as teachers trying to think of, okay, what can they relate to? What better than just showing them on the computer virtually? We can't always just plan a field trip and go to a amusement park and get on a roller coaster, but hey, you can get online and do different simulations and allow them to work through it. Some people might feel like it's not as hands-on, but you still get relatively the same experience and sometimes more of an experience than you would with the hands-on. All right, so like I mentioned earlier, the real world connection. I have students, they a lot of times think that science is magic, and we have not a difficult time getting past that. But once we kind of get past that, okay, this is a real thing, this happens in real life, and once they start making those connections, they start to understand it better. Many of the virtual labs that you will find can easily be aligned to the standards. And I say that because I look at our standards. They say things like develop and use a model, plan and carry out an investigation, construct the argument or construct the explanation using evidence. So many of these virtual labs directly target and follow the standards. So the students are, for sure, the student is getting the experience with the standard. They're going over the standard. They're hitting all the targets and learning targets and things like that. Again, like I've already mentioned, with the student experiences, you may have some students that have experienced a lot of these things and you're just trying it together. Or if you have some students, they maybe not have had these experiences before, depending on what it is. And it may vary. I tell the kids all the time, okay, how many of you have ever made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and used apple jelly instead of grape jelly? Well, typically most of them raise their hand. That's a pretty easy experience when we start talking about mixtures and things like that. Occasionally you might have some, maybe they've never been to an amusement park, so they might not have that experience with roller coasters, or maybe they've been to the hospital at an x-ray or an MRI. So it varies. You have a variety of experiences to harbor on. Another point that I didn't even think about until I started throwing this together, and as I was kind of doing some additional research, is that it's similar to video games. So it kind of goes back to technology-based society. I look at how many students that we have that they are video gamers. They are gamers. They go home, they play a video game some days. They might do the video game instead of doing their homework. So some of them, it appeals to them as a video game, and this is one of those virtual. It's going to vary. Yes, you're going to have some students, they might not care for it. It might not be appealing to them. Not to say they have to be a video gamer to enjoy virtual labs. It's just one of those, it might come easier to others. I do have some students, they just don't care for the virtual labs. They don't get that same experience. I think myself as a teacher program and I was presented with a virtual lab, I was one of those at first. I'm like, yeah, this is great after about 2-3 minutes. Okay, now what? But it's just a matter of we have some different implementation ideas that we're going to talk about that might get them interested or might make it seem a little less overwhelming. All right, so again, like I said, today we're looking mainly at two things. So implementation strategies, and there's not many of them, but I feel like they're pretty straightforward because, like I said, with remote learning, distance learning, virtual learning, you don't want to overdo it because virtual learning for some people is already overwhelming, especially for an eighth grade student. And then just a couple of resources that I have either personally used, and I think there's one or two maybe that has recently been presented to me that they're in this one of those as we go on. This won't be the last. I'll still share resources and things like that, maybe on a discussion. Okay. So my first implementation strategy goes with modeling and guidance. When I first started virtual learning back in the spring, and I was trying to walk my students through how to do a virtual lab that I had assigned to them. And even though they had done it with me in class, it was like a whole new world to them. And they tend to do better, a lot of times students tend to do better by visually watching and then doing. So I'm pretty sure many teachers have heard of the I do, we do, you do. It's more so, it's used very commonly in math, but it's also used in science and other classes too. So one thing that I've done is to get all the kids used to it. If we might have a Zoom meeting and I'll share my screen, I say, hey, we're going to walk through this together. You're going to follow me. You can do it on your screen as well, but I'm sharing my screen so you can see what is supposed to happen, what it's supposed to look like. And then, so that's the I do. Or it's a combination of the I do and the we do. If it was just the I do, then I would strictly do it. It would be very strictly teacher led, teacher focused, and they would just be watching. As you move more to the we do, then you're looking at, okay, yes, I'm doing it, but you are doing it as well. So if we're all virtual, like I've already said, I might be sharing my screen so the students can see, okay, this is what it's supposed to look like, but they are also doing it along with me as well. And they're also interacting as well. They're not just relying on me to do the work to manipulate the lab. They are actually manipulating the settings as well. And then we get to the you do, where you're releasing them. That's where they get to the independent stage, and they should be able to do it on their own by that point. This is not something I would recommend doing in one sitting. I think as teachers, we kind of want kids to be able to do it on their own, but we have to kind of remind ourselves that it's progressive. So definitely start with the I do. And I say I do, again, I say I do, but it's more so, okay, you're showing them, but still give them the opportunity to engage and give input and things like that. Some of the things, so for me, I use Zoom a lot with my students, especially my online students. I have not used Google Meet. I've used WebEx, but I have not used it with my students as well. To me, Zoom is a little more user friendly, but again, all of these things have the option to share screen if you needed to do so. My second strategy goes along with providing feedback and encouragement. Like I mentioned earlier, this may not be everybody's cup of tea. I have a lot of students that they will get very frustrated, especially trying to learn virtually. Some of them would get so frustrated doing something as simple as trying to log in because they had such a hard time trying to log in. So making sure, like I said, don't just throw them out there to it, kind of walk them through it, especially if they're not familiar with it. Yes, we feel like because the way society is set up and we know that children are used to technology, I feel like I learned more from my students about technology and iPhones than me teaching them. but still just kind of not necessarily holding their hand, but guiding them through, giving them the feedback. Hey, try doing this setting instead of this setting, and encouraging them. When I start talking about one of my resources, a lot of times with my students, I'll say, hey, what happens if you click on Set Colorado? It might have something like math, and say, hey, what do you think will happen if you click math or you don't click math? And we kind of talk through everything, so they're not just kind of doing everything and looking at it like, oh, okay. We're actually discussing what's going on and talking about what would happen if I do this, what would happen if I do that. So again, it's really just like how you would do in class. It's just now it's all virtual. My third strategy, exploration. Um, Sometimes you just have to kind of let the kids explore on their own and with the lab and let them kind of figure it out on their own first. Not them, and I say figure it out, just give them the opportunity to play with it on their own, investigate on their own. Set the way, and I refer to Tech Colorado a lot because that is a very big resource for me. One of the two main ones that I use. I try to give the students a couple of minutes, maybe 5, sometimes 10, depending on time and how it's set up, to give them time to get familiar with the lab, to look at all the different settings, to see what happens when you change the settings and things like that before giving them the structure or the instructions to the lab. Um, I feel like that way they get a little more comfortable with it. It's not as intimidating. This is a good time too where I can jump in and check kids and ask them questions and things like that. Again, this more than likely is via Zoom or Google Meet or however, whichever platform you're using to meet one on one with your students virtually. But they have enjoyed it. I have noticed a big difference. It's not as overwhelming when I give them the time to kind of explore through everything. Not all virtual labs are set up to where you can explore like that. Some of them are structured where you have to go sequential. You have to do this before you do that, and this before you do that. But my students seem to enjoy it a little more when they get that opportunity to explore. Um, and not only just before, there's no problem. Okay, once they've explored before and they've gotten familiar with the settings, and then they do the lab, I would give them time to explore even afterwards, because as they've gone through the lab, they may have started thinking of some things that they could do. Okay, what if I tried this instead of this? Or what if this happens instead of this? Things that it kind of gets them going, gets them gets their thinking caps going. How you want to. I tell them you should think like a scientist, think like an engineer. So just to get their curiosity going. Okay. So resources. Like I mentioned earlier, my go-to resource is at Colorado. The last webinar, I mentioned this resource as well. It is completely free. My understanding is that they operate based on donations. I set up an account. I'm a weird person. I have multiple emails, however, but they have purposes. So I have my school work email. I also have a personal email that I dedicated strictly for education websites and resources. So it's one of those like, okay, maybe this one I don't want to put my work email in there, or if my work email is not approved, I'll use this one and play with it at home and see if it's something. Because a lot of times, maybe afterwards, I'll go back and bring it to my PLC members, or I'll bring it back to my science coach and coordinator and say, hey, I stumbled across this resource. I just want you to check it out, and things like that. But let's just let us go to it. So, like I said, that's Colorado. In fact, right here. It's a free account. You can log in. I'm just going to search. Let's try Energy Skate Park. That was one that we had done in the past. And the only thing I would recommend is that your students, whether they're on the school computer or a personal computer, that they kind of double check everything. if I recall, they're switching everything from like Flash to or from Java to something else. You don't necessarily have to download it. You can just click play. And let's go with the one with graphs. And we did this one when we were talking about kinetic and potential energy. So like I said, you have all these different settings. So something I would have the kids do before even looking at their lab sheet and things like that is look at all the different settings that you have going on, what looks familiar, what looks different. And you have some of them without even being prompted, they'll go ahead and start clicking on stuff and moving stuff, and they'll do like what I just did, and they'll start seeing what's happening on the graph right here. So we could say, if I want to take out thermal, I just want to see kinetic and potential, and then the total energy, I can do that. If I want to add friction and see what happens when I add friction, I can do that as well. Or if I wanted to increase or decrease the gravity and things like that. The good thing with this is I can always reset or restart. And typically what you'll find with a lot of set simulations as well is that you can it's almost like you have multiple simulations for one topic. So this is Energy Skate Park. This is still Energy Skate Park, but now I have the opportunity to build my own track. Students can build their own track if they want to. I could do like this. I could add another one, and maybe if I wanted to add a loop somewhere, add a loop like that. Probably too small, stuff like that. And this is one of those. This is a great one if I wanted to give the kids time to explore before actually giving them having them go through the actual lab handout. I could do that. Another good thing with this resource as well, if you create an account and then you go to for teachers, you can find all these different teacher submitted activities and things like that. And this cute little. So when you click on that, and you can look at the different levels. You can look at high school level, middle school level. And most of the time when I pick one, it's the high school level. And I can take the PDF, it might be a PDF, it might be a Word document, and I can upload it into Google Classroom and set it to where the students can make a copy to where the students can type in it themselves. I've had some students back in the spring when we did this because they still weren't familiar with the Google Classroom. They just pulled up the handout and actually learned this part because I thought it was cool, and I think everybody learned this. They pulled up the handout, wrote everything down on a piece of paper. Then if they had an iPhone, now with iPhones, you can take pictures and turn them into scanned documents, and they just scanned it in that way. So all these different things, and these are all different teachers that have submitted them. You can sort it by subject, like I said, level, and then you have subject as well. Okay. This next resource is one that was recommended to me, Merlin. I'm still trying to get familiar with this one. When I started playing with it, it seemed like it was linked to Set Colorado. But again, I think that was the wrong one. But again, this is a resource. Like I said, I'm learning this one. I'm playing with this one as well. I did go ahead and set up an account, and it's showing I'm not logged in. But once I had logged in, it kind of started taking me around with different things like that. And you can filter it based on physical science and things like that. Yes, everybody's physical science for 8th grade, so you can filter it for physical science. But I'm definitely going to keep you updated with that one because I was really interested to see how that one works. Okay. All right. Another big resource that I use is CK12. The good thing with CK12, one, is linked to Google Classroom. So I could actually come in here and find a simulation and assign it to the kids, and they could access it through Google Classroom. So I'm not having to type all these instructions. Okay, go to this website, make sure you type this in, log in, find our class, and then find this assignment. I can just go ahead and directly assign the assignment to them, and they can go straight to it. Okay. Let's see. So I'm already logged in. Let's do another. I think air was one that we did with this one. Air matters. And these simulations tend to be a little bit, so let me backtrack. It has simulations, you've got reading, you've got videos, you've got all kinds of different activities. You can filter it by grade, obviously you can filter it by subject, but you can filter it by science. And so air matters was one that I did with my kids, and they were able, and it's a short one, it's not too complex. So if you're a teacher that worries about, okay, well, what about my students with IEPs or my students with 504s, or if it's one of my L or ESOL students, you can filter it. And this one was one of those, kind of like another exploration lab activity, because it doesn't have a lot of instruction to it. So I was able to allow the kids time to filter it. Okay, they can read about helium or neon. If they wanted to jump to molecules and see what a water molecule looked like, if they wanted to turn off different settings, they could do that. So, again, very user friendly. It is free. I have two CK12 accounts. One is linked to my personal email account that I use for education stuff, and then when our district transitioned remote for everything and started setting up Google accounts, this was kind of the perk of it. So, but I mean, it's free, like I said. All right, another resource that was recently presented to me over the summer. I'm still playing with it as well. Like I said, right from the last webinar, I am currently both in person and virtual learning. With my virtual students, they have like a guided instruction. I mean, not instruction, but a guided curriculum that they have to follow. But I have the leniency to supplement something. And my physics lab is another one that was recommended to me. And this is one, like, so far I haven't found much to it. But again, I can kind of, because I've been teaching physical science for not so long, but this is my 6th year, I'm kind of familiar with the different topics. Like, I know I could do the pendulum. I could do pendulum with direction field. I could also I just saw another one, mutual attraction, reaction force pendulum, and roller coaster with spring, and tie them into different standards and things like that. But this one again, so far from what I've seen, this might be one that I might add with my phenomena. There have been times where I start my phenomena and I might start off with a set lab and kind of manipulate the settings so the kids to see, okay, what should be happening, or allow the students time to explore before giving them that guided portion. Now, this last resource, I would recommend. I know throughout the whole state, everybody's got different platforms that they use, different textbooks and things like that. So I would say a strong recommendation, if you do, and I know some people don't have a textbook, but if you do have a textbook, find out what you can about it and see maybe if it has like a virtual option to it, or what other resources are offered with it as well. So for example, this is my textbook that my district uses. It is by Hawk, and I always say it funny, so I apologize. Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. We did textbook adoption about, I'd say 2-3 years ago now. But that is pretty much it as far as virtual lab. Like I said, I will continue to upload different tips and ideas and things like that as they come up. And I appreciate your time. That's it.